Let's take a look at the internet weather over the last week or so here. And the first item they have here is bytes on source port 161 UDP. That's Simple Network Management Protocol. And we talked about this last week. It was basically the early phase of some denial of service attack activity. As we reported last week, it was actually a reflective denial of service attack against a target in China. I think there's some diversity in the targets here. That is, it's changing over time. So the more recent targets I don't think actually are against China. The more significant aspect here, and to correct a mistake from last week, we're seeing attacks up in the gigabit range. It's not tens of gigabits, but certainly the gigabit range. So that's a significant consideration. That is, we had not seen that previously. So somebody has basically cracked the code here in being able to increase the effectiveness of SNMP based reflection attacks. So that's significant. You want to pay attention to that. Make sure that you're not exposing SNMP unnecessarily. But I think most of the traffic is coming from some other places. So in any case, keep an eye on that. Hopefully this isn't a growing trend. We did see some decrease in activity over the last week or so, but we're going to need to keep an eye on that. Looking at the top 10 most probed ports, at the top of the list here, port 22, followed by port 23. We're going to look at some of these a little bit more closely. Port 135 TCP, as we've been seeing a lot of probing activity on that one as well. 443 TCP, 445 TCP, port 80, 8080, that's basically web proxy. 1900 UDP, that's Simple Service Discovery Protocol used in the reflection attack activity. We have a new one here, port 9200 TCP. We'll take a little closer look at that as well. So first drilling into port 135 TCP. This is associated with Microsoft DCE endpoint resolution. I'm showing 90 days of activity here, and as you can see, traditionally we had seen an awful lot of activity here. It actually has gone down significantly, so I think that's a good thing. Now, overall, all of this activity, regardless of the volume, is really, to a large extent, attributable to one organization that's performing this activity. Multiple addresses, I think on the order of dozens of addresses that are performing this. The reason that we know it's basically related to the same activity, first of all, that they're kind of registered under the same name, and secondly, the activity goes down and up together. And so we're still a little unclear what the objective is here. This was actually, Brian, this will be new to you. What we had actually been seeing is an attempt to basically log in under a particular user credential. So I don't know if they're actually looking for a specific user in this activity, but or trying to just really evaluate the presence and the potential vulnerability on this port. This port was pretty much dead on the internet for a while, and then this activity really woke it up again. And it's been going on for on the order of about a year now. Next item here is scam probes on port 23 TCP. That's Telnet, and we've been tracking this activity. It's really Internet of Things, or well, I like to say Internet of Insecure Things. That is, those devices that are not well designed for connection to the internet are exposing port 23 Telnet. Oftentimes have a default password that allows the attackers to basically walk into the systems, and users are often unaware of that. This is a case where we see another sort of spike in activity in the last few days here, where we're seeing a lot more probes. In this case, we're not seeing a lot more sources doing that probing, and then there's been a decay after that. So normally when we see a lot of sources doing the probing, big increases, we know that's a botnet being controlled together. This is a case where we're seeing just a handful of addresses that are creating a lot more probing activity. There are ways to use botnets to do that, and perhaps that's a possibility, but in this case, it certainly isn't showing as lots of different IP addresses. Looking at the top 10 most sources doing the probing, regardless of what I just described, port 23 still is at the top of the list by far, followed by port 445 TCP, and then we have some ICMP and a couple of point P2P type activities taking place, and then followed by 1900 UDP, and that would be, again, associated with reflective denial of service attack activity using Simple Service Discovery Protocol. Okay, so taking a little closer look at port 9200 TCP, this is associated with Elasticsearch, and I'm going to defer, perhaps Jim, maybe you can tell us a little bit about Elasticsearch and how that might be related to this activity here.
Yeah, Elasticsearch is Elasticsearch along with Logstash and Kibana are three pieces of technology that get used together a lot in log aggregation and making nice dashboards out of it. People have used it as a poor man's Splunk replacement. So 9200 is the REST API port, default REST API port for Elasticsearch. And there was a vulnerability announced in mid-February in versions on the 1.4 tree before 1.4.3 and in the 1.3 tree before 1.3.8. So there were some new patches out. February 11th is when the patches were released.
Okay. And so when we look at the activity that's on here, these spikes in activity, I suspect this is researchers performing that activity. That started right around the third week in February. And then subsequently what we're seeing is some increase in the number of sources of activity that are performing this probing. Again, a little bit different slant here. It doesn't really look like botnet activity per se, or perhaps this later part really does look like botnet activity. Oftentimes that's indicative when you see an increase in source addresses progressively like that, that there's some type of recruiting operation going on. So we're going to need to keep a close look at that, investigate it a little bit further, and see if there actually is a botnet and perhaps some command and control around this activity that's growing. The numbers here are not large, and so it doesn't really lend itself to suggest that very conclusively that it's a botnet at this place. We're looking at tens of addresses at a time, as opposed to some of the botnets we're tracking. The port 23 activity was up around 150,000 sources that we saw at any given time. So significant difference here.
Yeah, this vulnerability allows remote code execution. Basically, you can drop Java on the box unauthenticated and execute it. So if you're running Elasticsearch and you have it exposed to the internet, you really need to be on 1.4.3 or 1.3.8.
And just a note here, most of the sources, not all, but most of the sources associated with the activity trace back to 3 specific ASNs, all of which are in China. So perhaps there's some sort of an outbreak in that space, or perhaps it's deliberate. It's hard to say.
Yeah.